So this is advanced scouting. Welcome to the presentation.
Okay. All right. So about us. So I am Scott Young. I am a mentor here on the Neutrons. This is my second year. I'm a Northeastern student, mechanical engineering. In high school, I was on Team 409, so that's another New England team for 3 years. I've been involved in scouting / strategy for pretty much my whole time in first, and I'm also on the mechanical side of things here.
Yeah, I'm Patrick. This is my 5th year on the Neutrons. I'm a mechanical student. I do scouting, and I'm a freshman at Brookline High School.
I'm Brian Estevez. This is my 4th year on the Neutrons. I'm involved with the program sub-team in scouting, and I'm a senior at Urban Science.
So overview of today, we're going to go over the basics of scouting, parts of scouting, analyzing data, and then we're going to open it up to questions at the end.
All right, so what is scouting and why scout? So we're kind of going to start from the beginning for those of you who may be new to first and kind of not sure what competitions look like. So scouting is a really big part of competition success. So, I mean, it's obvious that having a good robot is going to help you be successful. But if you don't know what to do with that robot, what strategies to employ in order to win matches, you're going to have a tough time. So scouting is the process in which we take data on teams to help you make alliance selections and then also help you to make informed decisions when you're planning for individual matches during quals. So because your robot's only 1/3 of your team's success, even if you have a really good robot, that doesn't mean that you're going to win. So yeah, as it says, alliances win competitions, not robots. And that's been shown to be true time and time again. One robot can't just carry an alliance and win in 95% of scenarios.
The parts of scouting, there's pre-scouting, which is where you look at the teams at your event before you go to the event. Pit scouting, where you walk around the pits and talk to teams and assess them in the pits. Match scouting, where you assess them in the matches they play. And match strategy, where you help your drive team and pit crew out with who they're competing with during qualification matches and who they're competing against. And data analysis, which is where you turn it into a pick list for alliance selection.
So yeah, on our team, the way we organize the hierarchy, or so the scouting roles as we have it, to kind of organize the way we go out in competitions. So you have a lead scout, a match scout, a pit scout, and an analyst. And some people kind of double dip in the roles because of the way our team is structured. So the lead scout organizes all aspects of scouting. So we'll make a scouting schedule to see which match scouts scout what matches and certain robots. Pit scouts, people who go into the pits, ask questions, pay attention to the actual physical parts of the robot, things like wiring and how certain parts of the robot are set up. So that's kind of pit scouting. And then the analyst, which is usually the lead scout and some match scouts, so we have some analysts that kind of just create the pick list and look at those specific data points to make a pick list and assist with the people in the pits that are actually trying to formulate strategies for matches.
Yeah, so we usually have, this is specifically for our team. There are plenty of other ways to do it, but we have 2 lead scouts, and then the entirety of our team who isn't competing isn't in the pits is match scouts, and then whoever is interested is an analyst.
So ways to collect data. So obviously, in order to analyze data, you have to get it in the first place. So one of the older and more, I guess, tried and true methods is to use paper scouting. So teams would, print out sheets of paper and take data points based on individual robots using those paper. And then they'd either go through and hand tabulate results, or sometimes they would integrate it into something like Excel or Google Sheets. One of the problems with paper scouting is that it's a lot of sheets of paper to go through and parse the data. There's opportunities to mistakenly enter numbers when you're transferring from paper. And so kind of the newer way, and if you have the resources to set it up, way to do scouting is digital scouting. And that's the use of tablets, computers, phones, some sort of technology to have an input system where the scout inputs data, and then that data is sent to some sort of database where the data is then stored and parsed through, and some sort of analytics, whether it just be simply averages or some advanced statistics, are outputted.
we're going to show you a few scouting apps that already exist for the first community. So this is Scouting FRC. It's online. It's free for anyone to use. You just go to the website, enter team number. It's pretty simple.
Yeah, so that is
Basic.
one thing that's super important to note is that you don't necessarily have to have the ability to set up one of these systems yourself. There's a lot of systems already in place, set up by other teams that have been working at this for a while in terms of creating an electronic system. So you can kind of jump on with those, test some out to see which one fits your needs. The website won't load right now for unknown reasons, but there's also, yeah, we can, if anyone has questions about it, we can kind of pull it up. But in New England, there is, well, we won't say. In New England, there's a kind of an alliance of teams called the Green Alliance. It was started by Team 4909, which is kind of where my involvement is with that, which is because that's my high school team. And the idea is to kind of help lower resource teams in terms of resources monetarily, software experience, and number of scouts. You know, those are kind of the three main problems with setting up an electronic system, and help those teams to overcome those challenges and to be able to get electronic match data. So kind of the general system is there's a website, and you can, you know, multiple teams that are using the Green Alliance will come together and work at a competition. So instead of having all 6 scouts, you need 6 scouts, and this team needs 6 scouts, and this team needs 6 scouts. If you have 3 teams using the Green Alliance, you just each need 2 teams at a time, and then you can kind of pool your data. And so that's a nice collaborative method. So if you guys have any questions about that, I can answer that. So, but in terms of UI, it looks similar to Scouting FRC.
So in our case, we kind of have our own in-house developed app with Team 294. So the way this works, this is Scoutmaster. So we essentially make a config file every year to kind of update the web app, and we make it in a way so that it's kind of user-friendly to any new scouts. So there are simple data points to record. So you start off with the team number and match number that you're recording. A picture pops up along with the team name. Then you can match, like click where they start off on the map. So you can say that's your starting position, starting placement. They scored in the scale here, and you can do fun things like that. And then we break it down from like auto to teleop, and then their comments. And then we can also do several other things with this app, like take notes. We can make we have a list of all teams at events, and so we store all our data on teams. There are graphs that you can use, so you can graph like certain values. Oh yeah, certain values over other values, and on different axes, and kind of showcase that. And then at all times, wherever you are on the app, you can have, like, if you're on the graph or the list or code, or yeah, mainly these two actually, you can have access to the pick list down here, which is freely editable to drag and drop. And the way we currently have our scouts doing it is we have them working on a tablet, and we have shifts organized. So on a spreadsheet, the scouts will get assigned a certain number of matches, and they can just check the match schedule here. Or since this isn't really typed in, yeah, this is kind of a test event, so there are no matches on that match schedule. But at a normal event, students would go onto that match schedule, and they can see which matches they've completed by the data actually being filled in. So normally on the match schedule, all the matches will be red because they're empty with data, and then once they're completed, they'll be filled in white. So we can know wherever we are by just loading up the web app which matches are completed and which we can report about, and we can also tell scouts what they've missed and stuff. And that's all organized through here, and then kind of a shipped-based spreadsheet.
So did you supply the tablets, are you saying, or did they do it on the phones?
So originally, you could, since this is a web app, you can really access it on any device with a browser. But we found that kind of complicated because they need to have to deal with people charging their individual devices and kind of switching off. So the team ended up getting some Kindle Fires because you can buy them in bulk relatively cheaply. And so you can have 6 scouts at a time, each working on the same device. So there are no compatibility issues or anything, because sometimes you ran into issues on certain, like OSs specifically, more so on iOS a lot of the time. So by everyone being on the same software, on the same type of device at the same time, it kind of just kept things kind of easy managed. Yeah, easy to manage.
Sorry, this is an example of something on Google Sheets. Google Sheets is if you don't want to bother with going through a scouting app or the messiness of a paper, Google Sheets actually works really well, or Excel. Both of them are totally viable options for scouting.
So one big thing about scouting is training. So the first time you have your scouts get an event should never be at a competition, because it can be very confusing and daunting, especially with how intense scouting can be, where you have to really pay attention to the way certain robots are acting and writing specific comments on the strategies that those robots are employing. You want to make sure that you give your scouts time to overlook your software and kind of be like, oh, hey, we have an event coming up in like 2 or 3 weeks. Here's the software, or here's our spreadsheet, or here's our paper layout. Here's what we do, and kind of walk them through it beforehand and kind of train them a bit. So we've used match videos before, so just have them watch match VODs, and you can just scout with them hand in hand and showing them how to take specific data points using those like match VODs. And yeah, you can also practice at off-season events. So like week 0 events, as well as like summer and fall off-season events are good times to train scouts, because those usually aren't as intensive or as competitive as normal events. So you can kind of get some leeway with data mistakes and talk to your scouts about where they made those mistakes. Another big thing about training your scouts is making them realize how important scouting is as a role. Sometimes some scouts will be like, oh, I'm just sitting here in the stands recording data. What am I really doing? Well, especially when you have newer students who see the older students like on the field, picking up the robot, or in the pits, working on it and stuff. So sometimes when you have them sitting there for a while, just doing that one same thing throughout the entire day, it's kind of helpful to make them realize, oh, this is important. This is how you're contributing to helping us win the event or helping us be successful at the event. So you want to kind of drive home how important their role is as a scout to make sure that they know what they're doing is worthwhile and worth their time.
So yeah, that kind of leads us nicely into the next slide. I'll make it exciting. It's always good, the top one's kind of a joke, but at the same time, it's good to keep your scouts awake. As Brian was talking about, it's really important to make sure the scouts understand the importance of what they're doing. I know that when I first joined a team, scouting definitely seemed like, the job that people that didn't really have another job just kind of got shoved into, and it seemed like, almost like a punishment in a way. And to realize without scouts, you could have the best robot in the world, and that you're not going to go on and win worlds. I mean, you're not. So, making sure that scouts really understand that what they're doing is actually just as important as the drivers and the pit crew, and everyone relies on everyone to make a team be able to operate successfully at a competition. Running shifts is also really important. Kind of going back to the candy point, you don't want your scouts falling asleep, because if they're falling asleep, they're not engaged, they're not taking good data points, and bad data, well, it's bad. It's going to lead to you making uninformed decisions. You're going to think that you have a good idea of what's going on and that you're making decisions that are going to help you win, when in fact that's based on basically fake data. So it's really important that your data is good, and the best way to do that is to keep your scouts refreshed. And it's also really important to keep it fun, and to keep your scouts engaged. The more that they view it as a chore, the less engaged they're going to be, and the less good their data is going to be. So actually last year we kind of piloted a program where we ran a match predictions contest. And so we had everyone in the stands, not just the actual scouts themselves, but we had everyone that was in the stands kind of participating in this, where they would just predict before a match, do we think the red alliance is going to win, or do you think the blue alliance is going to win? And then we just kept track of everyone's guesses and then what the actual result of that match was. And at the end of the event, we would kind of figure out who had the highest volume of correct guesses, and then who had the highest percentage, because obviously some people had to go and work in the pit sometimes. So you just kind of kept track of both. And it was a good way to kind of, if you had some incentive, the prize wasn't big. I think it was like a little 3D printed trophy, but it's something to keep people, everyone loves competitions. It's fun. Yeah. It's the same reason that we enjoy first competitions themselves. And so, adding some extra incentive to pay attention, and then, it can help people to know what to look for. If it's in somebody's best interest to be watching matches to figure out, in the future who can win, that's the same kind of information that's going to be helpful come a scouting meeting later to figure out, oh, this team's really good at this one specific thing. So the more informed people you have on your team, obviously the better.
So a couple things to bounce off that actually. One, about shifts. The way you organize shifts for your scouts is very important, and depending on how lengthy you make them. For example, if you go to district events where you tend to have like a bit over 100 matches,
Around 100.
yeah, around 100 matches, you want to keep those shifts relatively short, depending on how big your team is, around maybe 10 to 15 per shift. And with that, it kind of gives them time in between to breathe and kind of look around the event sometimes, go to the pit, see the robots. And sometimes that time to breathe lets them experience other things, which is kind of good. And going back to making it fun, things like that match fixing competition were really nice because that engagement not only allowed them to just be like, oh yeah, this match is coming up, but it also made them think, oh yeah, I scouted this robot 5 matches back, and now they're on the Blue Alliance, which I'm thinking about picking for this specific match competition. And as they get into that mentality, they actually start thinking about the robots in a more alliance specific way, which is helpful for when you get into scouting meetings. And they already have that mindset because of those small little competitions that they do in between matches of choosing alliances. So when you have those meetings, they come with the mindset like, oh yeah, this robot can put this up in the scale, this up in the switch, run the exchange, and plays out this specific strategy. And they were having those thoughts throughout the entire competition, which is what you want to slowly start training your scouts to do, to make those meetings very efficient and make good choices when you go to alliance selections. Between 10 to 15 matches. So the way we run it is that we have 6 scouts per shift, 1 per each robot, because you don't really want to do 1 per alliance, because then it's kind of hard to manage multiple. But you want each team to manage one robot at a time. And yeah, we found 10 to 15 is kind of long enough because especially kind of 15, sometimes we border on 20 if we don't have enough students. But what ends up happening is that you have things like field faults or like those kind of long periods in between matches that maybe something went wrong with the robot and you guys have to wait for FTA. And despite 10 to 15 matches not sounding that long, and the span of actual time, those can range between like an hour, like an hour and a half sometimes. So you don't want to have the same people sitting in the stands for that long, because it gets kind of draining, and then your scouts end up getting kind of bored. And like Scott here said, when your scouts are getting bored and tired, they're not going to make good decisions. They're not going to take good data, and they're not going to feel motivated at all. So that's very important.
I know it's kind of hard for some teams to do. A lot of teams don't have scouts to be able to do that short of shifts, but you can also just run people in many shifts a day, and just give them quick breaks in between shifts.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So pre-scouting, we find this to be pretty useful just before an event. Pre-scouting generally gives you an idea of your competition at an event, what other robots are participating at the event. If you see them in other events, so say you're at a week 3 event and you competed with another team at week 1, you kind of want to look at their VODs from say their week 2 event if they went to one, and look at any improvements. And it's just kind of your catch-up time to view your competition before an event to see, oh, hey, who am I facing this time? Are there any new faces, any old faces with new improvements, new strategies? You really want to use this time to look out for your upcoming competitions. So the main way we do this is really just take match videos of teams, watch match videos of teams, and kind of just like take small notes, side notes, or just like on a spreadsheet or just on paper, and kind of record them and then talk with our scouting team about it. And just have that small little meeting so we know which robots to look out for, which ones we want as maybe even potential alliance partners, and see how they cooperate in alliances, so we know what we're expecting as we get into the competition. And so this can be kind of crucial in the later season matches as you get into like your district championships or maybe even your champs, because you have such a high volume of really competitive bots that you want to know what each robot's strengths and weaknesses are and how you can compete with them or against them.
All right, so kind of touching off of different stats you can look at. There's a stat called Offensive Power Rating. This is one of the most common advanced statistics, I would say. So the simple statistics being like averages and medians, and most scouting platforms can fairly easily calculate those. But then you'll also see things like OPR, and it's important to understand what it is and when it's useful and when it's not. So OPR the idea is that it can calculate the average contribution that an individual team has on an alliance. So if a team is with So basically, the idea is it can figure out. It's a complex systems of equations that takes every match that's happened so far and tries to figure out why the result was as it was for each one of them as a direct result of how good each individual team is. It's really fairly useful for games with linear scoring. What I mean by that is where you score a ball, you get a point. You score another ball, you get another point, and anything like that. So like 2016 is a good example, Stronghold, where crossing defenses was 5 points, getting a boulder in the high goal is 5 points. Fairly straightforward linear scoring. And so that could help you to figure out, the teams that generally had higher scoring matches were probably scoring more points. But with teams or with games like 2018 and 2017, because the scoring was stepped in 2017 and then time-based in 2018, it kind of throws statistics like this off, and there can be other factors that OPR doesn't account for. And so in general, we find that in games like the past two, OPR has actually been a fairly poor way to evaluate how different teams actually are performing. So it's just kind of important to keep in mind what statistics like OPR and then there's certainly others out there, what they actually mean and in what context are they useful and in what context can they be misleading.
Okay, so pit scouting is where you walk around the pits and you take data on teams in the pits. Something that's common misconception about pit scouting, you really shouldn't be taking data on what teams say their robots can do. It's more important to take data on like how well their robot is wired, for say. Like if you go up to their pit and in the middle of their robot is just a rat's nest of wiring, you might not want to pick them because they've got a higher chance of getting disconnected in a playoff match. And if their bumpers are kind of look like they might fall off, it's another thing to look out for. It's also a great chance to become friendly with teams, make friends. It's much easier to go up to a team and ask, can we be on your alliance, if you know somebody on the team, and you can definitely make friends while pit scouting. You can also compare what they say they can do to what you actually find out they can do during match scouting and figure out if they are overplaying their abilities.
Yeah. Just bouncing off what Patrick said, yeah. Making friends is also super important, not just because for alliance things, but like you also end up making good friends like throughout the season. Like specifically 2017, we ended up making good friends with 5687. We ended up being our alliance partners in champs, which is cool because we kind of play with them throughout the seasons, and we had our up and downs together. But it's more so about like forming that relationship through the competition, through the season, and kind of learning about their team, and then like them learning about your team, and you together discovering other teams as well, and you get to kind of bounce off the information they know about other teams, and it's kind of good to have that relationship with other teams so you can share that. And another thing, like Pat was talking about, I like to call this kind of like the sticker price that teams give you, which is what they say they can do, which is usually like, oh yeah, we test this in our lab and we can do like 10, like we can do like 100 balls per second in the boiler, like in 2017. Like, yeah, we can do that. And then they end up putting no balls in the boiler, or sometimes they might not even have a shooter. I just want to say that so that they can sound good, so you kind of want to watch out for that, and definitely stick to your match data and always take what teams tell you with a very small grain of salt, unless like you really trust the people on the team. Oh yeah. So match scouting. So this is the meat and potatoes of scouting, really. So for example, whether you do this on paper, on a scouting app, or on a spreadsheet, match scouting is where you really get everything in. You want to kind of try to obtain as much data as possible while kind of keeping the way you obtain that data very simplistic. So for example, 2017 was kind of a hard way to gauge that, especially for shooter robots, because you can't just sit there and individually count how many balls they put up in the boiler, because either they're shooting way too fast or there's something else going on the field, or it's hard to see. There are things like that, variables like that kind of make things match scouting hard. But on top of that, you want to kind of make the things you're scouting, for example, like just maybe record how many gears they put up in 2017, or how fast you think you saw them shoot, or if they climb or not. You want to get data points like that and maintain all the small things like fouls and the way they played within the comments, which is what we'll talk about later. And comments are super important. But in terms of match scouting, you want to have a certain number of scouts on scouting at one time. Like I mentioned earlier, we usually do 6 scouts, and 6 scouts is what we recommend because you have one person per robot that's paying attention specifically to that one robot and giving all their attention to that one robot, instead of having 2 people maybe scouting one alliance and having their heads constantly moving and missing. Maybe they recorded like one robot scoring 2 gears when in reality they scored 3 because they were paying attention to other things happening on the field. So we highly recommend 6 people at once, but we understand it's kind of hard to do considering team sizes and stuff. But 6 is a good number. Some other teams who have a lot of manpower tend to having maybe 12 students and having those other students actually scout the students who are actually scouting to make sure they're recording proper data, and they record higher level data like actual strategy. So you can rely on, let's say, your tier 1 scouts to scout raw data, like they put up this, they climbed, and have your tier 2 scouts kind of say, they got a tech foul by doing this, and they also pushed against this other team and brought them back to the wall, and record things like that and how they play, so that you can talk about that in meetings or with your drive team. So things like that are super important. Yeah.
So kind of going off of what Brian was saying, comments. Most scouting systems have some sort of text box at the end of each match where you can just enter whatever you want about the match, things you observed. And it's pretty easy, if your scouts haven't been trained on what to put in there, to either have nothing put in those text boxes or really unhelpful comments. That happened a lot early on in my high school career. I noticed that I got very little actual useful information from this. And I think that really it was just because no one had really had the discussion about what was helpful. A lot of the really helpful comments are, what's the driver skill like? Are they just kind of wandering aimlessly around the field, or does it seem like they've had a lot of practice? Are they very direct with their motions? Do they adapt well if a situation kind of changes quickly? Can they kind of figure out a new strategy, or do they start doing that wandering? Do they have a good strategy from the start? Scouts are at this point have probably gotten to know, what teams are good at, and figuring out, does that seem like a good idea what they're doing, or does it seem like, they would be better off scoring the cube on this side of the field than this side, for example, with last year. Fouls and tech fouls, cards, red and yellow cards are obviously important to keep track of. And also, if it was like a blatant offense, or if they kept doing it, it's really important to note that, because it's possible that their drivers don't know the rules, and that's really important to know. And then technical problems. Sometimes there'll be a really low outlier score for a match, and you're looking at it and you're like, why did they do so bad this match? What happened? Well, maybe halfway through the match they died. And then you can go and talk to them and ask them if they fixed that problem. And then maybe that data point, it kind of becomes relevant. Or maybe it's in the other way, super important to know that in their last match of the event, they had technical problems, and maybe it wouldn't be a good idea to pick them because maybe they're not working. So
yeah. So one key thing about comments, which is a common not misconception, but common mistake that a lot of scouts do. We've seen this a lot on our team as well, and it happens kind of everywhere. You want to make sure your scouts take comments on stuff that you cannot obtain from the numerical data. Way too often we see things like, they put up they put up a lot of cubes. We can see that because they put up 5 cubes during tally up, You want to make sure you avoid stuff like that, because they're kind of just telling you what you already know. And you want to train your scouts to kind of take comments on like what Scott said over here, driver skill, strategy, fouls and stuff, and misplays during the game. You want to have them focus on that and not so much what they've already told you through the numerical data they've collected. And another thing with comments is you kind of have to balance the length, because normally you only have about maybe 2 minutes in between matches. So you usually 2 or 3 minutes in between a match. So you usually get either one of 2 things. You either get the really short comment because, the next match is starting already. Here, I'll write a sentence really quick, and you can really gather no information from that. Or you get the really chunky comments where the people kind of wait to the last minute to finish their comment and kind of miss maybe the first couple seconds of auto. So you kind of want to balance, because they just spend all that time writing their nice comments. Those nice chunky comments. Those are good, but you want to make sure you kind of balance the time in between matches and how long and how much information is actually in those comments. So yeah.
So for analyzing your data, throughout your event, most teams just do it the night before alliance selection. You really want to be looking at the data throughout the event. So analyzing your data is looking through your data and compiling it into a pick list. So when you're creating a pick list, you want to start by defining what you want in teams. Like what do you want for your first pick? What do you want for your second pick? And what do you want for your third pick if you're at Worlds? Third pick's really important at Worlds. And then you should also go over which ways alliance selection will play out, like who will pick who, so you can be prepared for what's going to happen.
So yeah, so kind of bouncing off Patrick was saying, creating pick lists. And this is probably, you can make a case for other things, but for the most part, creating a pick list is the main reason that we scout. It's the main reason that we're looking and collecting all this data. And it's kind of the combination of all of the information that you've gotten through the pits, through actual numerical data, through observations that you've made, observations that your scouting team's made. You know, it kind of brings everything together. So, you know, the first simplest way to look at it is just looking at numerical data, filtering by, once you figured out what you want your first pick to have. For example, 2017, you want your first pick to be really good at scoring gears. So you look and you figure out who the top teams at scoring gears are. It's also really important to note when you're looking at numerical data, which data points are you looking at? You know, sometimes you kind of want to look at both average and peak, you know, because sometimes a team's average is low because in the beginning half of the competition, you know, maybe their driver wasn't there one day because they were sick, or maybe their robot was malfunctioning, but they fixed it. So looking at trends, looking at what's the peak possible, even considering that, I keep going back to 2017, but there was a lot to consider that year. In 2017, there was a lot of times where robots would actually have lower gear averages later on in the year than the beginning of the year because of the fact that some matches they would be put with several teams who were really good at gears. And so they'd get the fourth rotor really early and they didn't have to score gears anymore. So looking into factors like that and considering it and realizing that the average is not, you know, a hard set number where they're just always going to have that average. Figuring out what situations you can put a team in to kind of maximize their success.
Another small footnote about creating a pick list, which I've noticed in terms of scout retainment and make people interested actually, is that when we tend to involve a lot of or maybe even our whole entire scouting team in the creation of the pick list or during our scouting meeting, while not everyone contributes, we do have a couple people who maybe scouted, maybe this is even their first competition, who scouted and given input. And since all input's welcome, we really help those scouts feel like, oh, they're really a part of the process, which also helps them want to scout more, which kind of increases that overall scout retention. So that's another thing to consider when creating a pick list. And also, even if you had scouts only working in small shifts, all input's kind of valid because you want everyone that kind of saw these robots to have an input on that. And even though there's stuff in the numerical data and there's stuff in the comments, there's always little tidbits of information that we miss out on because they never have time to comment or they didn't catch that, but they saw it with their own eyes. And you kind of want that firsthand eyewitness experience in those meetings and in the creation of the pick list. And another thing about creating a pick list, which I believe was already mentioned, but the tier system is super important because on top of the tier system, you kind of have these entire pools of robot types. So going back into 2017, because there is a lot, like Scott said, there is a lot to consider 2017. You had like your two main types of robots, and this kind of happens every year, but you had, for example, you had your shooters and your gearbots, but and you kind of wanted to divide those into different pools. Like this may be a tier 1 gearbot, but it's like a tier 3 or 4 shooter because they either have no shooter at all, they're very slow. So there are things like that you want to consider in how you're actually building your alliance and making it the best alliance as possible for you to actually win the event. So yeah, or do good at the event.
So this is an example of how we view, of one way we view data when we're compiling a pick list. We showed it in Scoutmaster. It's from our program where we graph two things against each other so we can see a team might be very good at one thing and be all the way down at this end of the graph, but they're really low on another thing.
Yeah. So you can, if you do work on things like a spreadsheet, you can also kind of make something like this, and it's kind of best to go from like right to left, going down the list and seeing who your options are. Honestly, well, it's kind of apparent if you want to think, right? Just like these guys in this order, in this part right here are usually your tier 1s. These guys are usually your tier 2s, and these guys are usually like your tier 3s. So if you ever do graph it like that, you kind of have a general idea of what you're looking at. But then you have some cases like you see how we're grabbing here on specific variables and specific axes. So while let's say 343 may be really good at putting up a bunch of cubes, that could have been a bunch of cubes in the scale or a bunch of cubes in the switch. This is just the total amount of cubes. So when you graph it again, they might be in a different position. So those are things to consider when you're actually considering where they're actually scoring or what they're actually doing instead of just doing totals. So it's just another thing to consider.
So this is an example of one of our pick lists from 2017 Worlds. This is my favorite pick list that we've created because we stayed up past 1 a.m. making it, and I think it was our most accurate pick list ever.
Yeah.
But you can see our tier systems here. We arranged teams by how many gears we thought they could get, and that was super helpful when it came around to making our second pick. Because a lot of these teams got crossed off our list because they've been picked by other people. So we ended up picking that team. But it was really helpful during alliance selection to have all the tiers laid out for us.
Yeah, and on top of other tiers, you kind of have other things here. So other things useful when creating a pick list, you have like an entire team list that you can kind of just cross off when you're saying, oh, yes, this is going to be on our list, and those you can kind of cross those off. Other things you see, like the don't pick list, those are teams that have major technical problems that if in any event they were in a position to be picked by them, we'd have to kind of decline them. An actual pick list, and on the notes side, there are team numbers there, but if you went further, there'd be actual notes that were kind of key points that we'd have to factor when actually talking about those teams. And other small organizational things that would really help when making your pick list. Yeah.
All right, so the alliance selection process itself is really important because obviously you send one representative down on the field to make selections, to accept, decline, and it's a lot of pressure on one person. So making sure that person is prepared for that role, and then also making sure that you have proper communication between them and everyone else is really important. So the first thing that I'm going to touch on here is that declining is okay. I know that there's definitely a negative stigma against doing it. If you ever do it, you're going to hear the whole crowd go, ooh. It always happens. It's really, you have to make the decision that's best for you guys strategically, though. And if you have made the determination that it's in your best interest to decline a team, it's perfectly okay. It's part of the competition. There shouldn't be any hard feelings held over it. It's a part of the rules. Your team representative that you send down should know the teams very well. They shouldn't be just reading numbers off of paper. They should understand the implications of, if I end up picking this team, then this other team would work really well with us. So it's really important that the person you send down there is very knowledgeable. But at the same time, it shouldn't all come down to that one person. Communication from the rest of the team to your team representative is good. And so messaging or anything like that to make sure that the person's kept in the loop. And if they're not realizing something, just to reiterate and make sure that they don't feel like they've been left completely high and dry and to make this whole decision by themselves is really important. And talking to your alliance partner before you make your last selection is really important. Make sure that they're on the same page, that you guys are going to go into eliminations with everyone happy with the alliance that you have, and that everyone's going to work together well.
Yeah, so communication really is key as an alliance representative, because you want to make sure you're communicating with the people on your team that this is the right decision for the team, because again, you're making the decision for the team to compete. So usually what most people do is either have text messages, or what I see a lot of people do as well is kind of have an earpiece and just have a call with usually people in the stands or in the pits, kind of discussing any finalized picks or any strategies we're going to see, because a lot of things change in the alliance selection process, especially if you're like below first seed, because all of a sudden first seed picks or maybe you're in like fourth seed and a bunch of teams on your pick list got picked already, and you don't know where to go from there. If you haven't gone that deep with your pick list, it's kind of useful to have those people on the line to be like, hold up, we'll help you make the decision, and it's useful in that way. And you also don't want to not communicate what's going on, because that's just not useful at all to people on the team and people you're working with.
So one of the other major things about alliance selection is people oftentimes want to make sure they're ready to pick when the person with the microphone comes up to you. If you're the person they play Jeopardy music for, that's okay. These are some great scouting resources. The Blue Alliance, they have every event, every team. They have match videos for most events. It's not a place where you can actually scout, but every match video, well, almost every match video is on there from events, and they also put OPRs. It's a really great resource.
Just kind of jump off that. The Blue Alliance is also helpful in a multitude of ways, even beyond scouting. If you're just trying to get to know teams' histories, past games, look at different strategies that have worked in the past, rewatch championship videos to kind of figure out how the top teams perform, rewatch even your old videos to figure out how you improved over the course of the season. I can definitely say that the Blue Alliance, from January to the end of Worlds, is one of the websites that I visit the most. And there's just a wealth of information that you can glean from there. So I can't recommend that enough. What?
Do you want to show it?
Yeah, sure. Actually, show of hands. Who doesn't know about the Blue Alliance? Okay, I'll show you guys real quick. So the way the website's structured is it shows events that are happening this week. Right now, these are just off-season events. It also shows some kind of statistics from the year, but those aren't really important for us right now. This search bar up here is the super important thing. So you can enter any team, like 25, and it's going to pull up us. And you can look at what happened in all of our competitions, all our matches, who we played with, what the final scores were. If you click on, this match right here, you can see breakdown of how those scores were reached, based on cubes, based on autonomous points, all these things. And those exist. And then this video, this specific match doesn't have a video for some reason.
The ones with the play buttons have videos.
Yeah, all these are videos. And there's just so much. It shows district points, which is obviously really important for qualifying for the district championship and the world championship. So I can't say enough about how useful Blue Alliance is in general.
Seasons.
Yeah, go ahead.
You just showed. Go back to
One of the matches.
Yeah, you just showed one of your matches. Yeah.
Sure.
Detailed results.
Yeah.
Is that all the stuff that comes automatically off the field management system?
Yes.
Yes.
Is that what that is?
Yeah, that's auto-populated.
So how quickly is that information available?
Pretty quickly.
Yeah.
It's within
To,
a couple matches behind what? Yeah, it's probably within 5 to 10 minutes of the match happening.
My question for you is, you have these elaborate scouting. Wouldn't you want to just delta between what you get off the field management system and what you on the field management system?
So the main problem with the Blue Alliance, while the insights that it gives you are fantastic and obviously accurate because they're coming from the field itself, which determine the actual scores, is that these are all alliance numbers. We don't get from this, we don't get what team A did and what team C did. We just get this alliance did this. And another problem is this doesn't actually have total number of cubes. Like for this game, this is just about, how many seconds you had ownership of the scalar switch, but you don't really know how dominant that was. It's definitely good for getting a high level overview of if this team's winning in convincing fashion in all of their matches, they're probably good. But to know how good, or if that was kind of a product of a lucky match schedule, it's really important to take your own. When you go undefeated,
However, if any teams ever plan on actually developing any sort of scouting app, the Blue Alliance does offer their own API to draw things like match schedules and stuff straight from the event. So that's super useful. That's what we use the Blue Alliance API in our scouting app to just draw match schedules, who's playing who, and stuff like that from the Blue Alliance website. So yeah. Another wealthy resource of information is the Compass Alliance, where we not only will have scouting presentations, but really presentations and information on all sorts of things, all FRC, all FTC, all FL, everything first, really, on how to get things started. Presentations from us, as well as many other teams all over first. So that's kind of a wealthy resource of information to really learn anything. And I believe these presentations will be.
Yes, all the presentations from today will be on the Compass Alliance.
Yeah. I'm sure you've already heard about it.
Probably.
Yeah. Any questions?
Right. Questions?
I have an alternate question. Mm-hmm. So 2 years ago, Brennan heard me say this earlier. 2 years ago, so we're a 13-year-old team, 17. We switched up 2 years ago when the fellow who started it retired, and I took over and started trying to actually, as opposed to just have the students do everything. We got a world invite that year 2 years ago, and we were completely unable to do anything about it. We were broke. We only have 7 students. Notice the thing I'm going to ask you now. We only had 7 students. How on earth do we do scouting in any form?
So I guess there's kind of a couple ways you could go about it. I mean, the one of the most obvious ways, which again, I guess I'm going to kind of make a shameless plug here, is teaming up with other teams to scout. Yeah, that's a pretty new thing. And there's other alliances like it. That's just the one I'm most familiar with because I've been involved. I can talk to you afterwards if you want. I can hook you up with people with that. But
by the way, thank you for Compass, because when we started trying to sort things out a few years ago, and it's serious, freaking nightmare. The amount of information that's overwhelming out there, and so much of it garbage about what to do. So I appreciate you guys are curating information so we can.
The other thing I'd recommend doing is if you contact teams that like teams with history, teams that have been good for a while or do a lot of outreach.
So because I actually build surgical robots for a living, and we all know Aura Surgical Robotics has mentors for in 1970.
Yeah.
And I'm very good friends with the director of Auras, so I have access to some really good stuff, but it still doesn't help you transfer that into your own.
I'm talking about more specifically for scouting. If you talk to any team with history and go up to them and say, we don't have many people, but we got it, but we still want to get scouting data, most teams will either give you access, let you help.
Yeah, that would be great. I don't actually understand why the scouting data is not just public.
So the reason for that is, so sometimes people's data can vary, but the main thing is people kind of like to keep their data private because it's, in some cases, like when people use like spreadsheets specifically, it kind of shows you what they're looking for specifically, and it's kind of like showing you their complete strategy for the event and how they plan on winning it and who they plan on picking. So they kind of see that as kind of secure.
It's like the raw data. This is like got to be the best example of how machine learning to just be dumping that data out into a raw pipe.
Yeah.
The entirety of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be very nice if there was just a common like way to get data, but there isn't.
The main problem is that
it's hard.
the sensors on the field themselves are just so reliant on whether or not one alliance is winning or the other alliance is winning, and there's really very little in terms of which robot is doing what. That's really the hardest thing, is that if First had data on each individual robot, I'm sure they would publish it, but they don't build the fields to take in that information, which is why we have to kind of step in.
A PhD student basically takes a camera to watch the field from above. Exactly. This is like a perfect PhD student.
Or just like a common scouting app for everyone to use.
Yeah.
The problem is convincing everyone to do it.
Yeah.
I think part of the problem is that scouting on apps is really just starting to become a common thing. Like when I joined First a few years ago, a lot more people are using paper than are now. So it's still becoming the standard.
It's still in its infancy.
We're a first-year team. We're lucky if we're going to have 7 students participating going forward. What advice would you give us for scouting? Because it seems like we're probably not going to be in a situation where we're going to be picking people to make alliances. We might get picked to make alliances, but what would you recommend us to do in terms of scouting? Because it does sound like something we should develop.
Yeah, I think that it's important to, at the very least, even, you might be surprised, by the way. I have definitely seen rookie teams do significantly better than they think that they will, especially in early events. So don't think that you have no shot going into it, because that's another problem, is that oftentimes, sometimes teams will seed really high and be completely unprepared for it, and then have no idea what to do with this super high pick that they have, which is unfortunate because they've worked really hard to get it, and then they don't know what to do with it. It's not just you. That happens all the time. I've seen it countless times. So I guess what I would suggest for you is, I mean, obviously you can't run a system where you have 6 scouts and then you have another 6 scouts kind of switching off. And I mean, I think that's the end goal, is to grow your team to the point that you can do that. But I think that the kind of most important things are to still keep strategy in mind and to not let that completely slip, to have just as many resources as you can give up to be watching and, you know, taking in as much data as they can. And then I'm really going to suggest working with other teams early on to kind of get you guys off the feet.
Yeah, like even our team won competition in 2017. Our team didn't decide to go with our full team to an event because we'd just gone to 3 events before and we didn't actually need to go to the event. We were just doing it for more practice. So at that event, I believe I was the only person scouting on my team. So we teamed up with another team. And teams are very willing. If you're especially if you're a new team or a team without much resources, just talk to other teams.
Yeah, there's one thing that's really great about this community in general is that teams all get it. We were all rookies once. We were all rookie members once. We were all rookie teams once. And it's incredibly hard to get off your feet in this program. Like, we all know that. So if we can help, you know, the new members of the community that are trying to do that, pretty much everyone's going to be willing to help you do that.
One method I've seen method I've seen people do is just get a general sense of, like, a general list by putting one person in the stands and just having them rearrange a list over the course of the competition. I have seen that before. It was just a one-person scouting team. That's not the best, but it does work.
I think that can be kind of useful for smaller teams, is kind of the drive team input from actually working hand in hand with the teams, because it's also a big aspect of who you play with or who you compete against. So so if you want to, like, talk to your driver and operator, kind of pay attention to who they're playing with plays, because eventually you're going to be playing against them or with them again. So that's also another thing that you kind of want to, if you can record data on or kind of pay attention to, as, like, say, a coach or a member of the drive team. That's another key way to get data if you're a smaller team, or just get insight on your competition.
Yes.
I have a question about, you guys are obviously experienced team, and you have developed relationship with quite a few other teams that you always pick. So you talked about the scouting technical data and, you know, how to distill the information out of that. But at the end of the day, how much that data is playing into a decision versus your existing relationship with others?
So I think it's kind of a combination, I would say, but mostly in terms of the by far the most important factors are our data and then figuring out which teams pair with us best. It's obviously really important to have good relationships with other teams, but just because we're best friends with another team doesn't mean we're going to pick them just because we're friends with them, if it's not the best strategic decision for us. If it's close between 2 teams and we feel that the fact that we've worked with them at a past event, like, I think that's something that was particularly attractive about the Outliers in 2017, was that, you know, we'd worked with them in several events before, worked through eliminations before with them. So we already knew each other's strategy. We knew how to win together. That's helpful. But in terms of just being friendly with another team, really shouldn't be a reason to pick them. You have to make the best strategic decision for your chances to win.
And more often than not, actually, if you're friends with a team, they're more so, like, fine with it if you don't pick them, because they're still kind of friendly at the end of the day. So if your relationships do play into it, it's more so if it's like they're a close second and say it's one team you've never known before, you don't know how they're going to play or how they're going to work with you, versus, say, one team that you've competed with before and gotten, like 56 days, we've gotten into the finals multiple times with them before, so we know how they compete. It's kind of like one of those things. So
yeah. It's the other thing is, you can also know if, like, say you know that their drive team practices a ton and is also very experienced during eliminations. It's also, you just might know some stuff about that team that makes them, that you couldn't observe normally during qualifications, that will help you make the decision.
Yeah.
Anyone else? That would be good. All right. Thank you, guys.
the